Here's to the finest crew in Starfleet.
Picard. Welcome, my friends. The moment we've all been waiting for and partially dreading has finally arrived. The Season 3, Episode 10, season finale of Star Trek Picard Season 3. All of those things I just rattled off there are true. This one is entitled The Last Generation. And if you're new here or have otherwise forgotten, I mean, for crying out loud, this is the finale here, but there will be spoilers ahead, so duck out now if you don't want those. And boy, are there a lot of them this episode. So this episode kicks off with a modified Star Trek Universe logo flyby. Normally that's the main hero ship of the series. I believe in Strange New Worlds it was the Enterprise. In this series up until now it's been the Titan. However, that has been replaced in this episode with the Enterprise D, and then that little logo, the rainbow logo thing at the end, was assimilated by the Borg. That was just a nice thing they really didn't need to do, but it's just nice they take these little moments seriously because they really do help with the overall enjoyment and the immersion in the show. The episode proper starts off with an address to the Federation, to Starfleet, to anyone within broadcast range that the Federation is under attack. Earth is under attack. It's being assimilated. They're being attacked by their young people. And this address is from President of the Federation, Anton Chekhov. And I really, really like this. They got Walter back. They got him to play his son here. We didn't see his face, but we actually heard the voice, and it's a very, very distinct voice. Now, this is interesting because I had speculated, would they get Kirk back? Would they get Sulu back? I never for once thought in my wildest dreams anything possible about them bringing in any sort of reference to Chekhov, and I really like that because of the three remaining original series cast members, he's the one that's kind of gotten the least love. He was put to the side in the animated series, he was not brought back in any of the Next Generation films or episodes for continuing adventures, and he's very rarely referenced. As far as I know, he's the only one that just kind of continued living their life in obscurity with no real on-screen mentions, and the fact that they named him Anton after Anton Yelchin, the actor who played him in the Kelvinverse movies, who have sadly passed. I thought that was a nice touch and a nice little honor of two Star Trek legends, I guess you could call them. We see all of the ships attacking Space Dock. It's falling, it's not doing well, and the only ship we have, which is currently out of range, is the Enterprise D, and of course we have some crew members that we're aware of on the Titan. I'm sure there's other crews on all the various other ships in Starfleet out there that are actively resisting, but as far as the purposes of our storyline, those are the only two ships that really matter to this storyline. We also get to see the intercutting between the Titan activities and the Enterprise D activities. So we see that 7 of 9 has rallied the remaining crew. The Doctor, nice to see her because she's been conspicuously absent and I wasn't sure what happened to her, but here she is, as well as the rest of the crew members they're able to cobble together who are over 25, and this includes a chef. This was a nice, lighthearted, funny moment, and I feel like this is something we see in Star Trek shows a lot. The crew member or the person that really doesn't have the skills or doesn't think they're up to the challenge, but they're clearly able to do that, so that's just a nice touch to the whole Starfleet training thing. These people are actually more capable than they think they are. The Enterprise D is where the crux of the emotional weight and the emotional catharsis of this episode takes place. We get to see our crew continuing on their voyage, trying to figure out how they're going to save the day, or if they're going to be able to save the day. And this was really, really great because we got to see them interacting on the old school bridge, on the old bridge of the D. They're bouncing ideas off of each other. They're taking readings. Just the typical type of stuff you would see in a Star Trek show of them working on a problem and trying to find a solution. And it just felt like we were back home. Obviously, they're much older. Their uniforms are different. But it felt like the type of thing that we would see. Maybe not necessarily on the bridge, but it was wonderful to see that nonetheless. They are able to discover that there is a Borg transmission coming from the solar system, coming from Jupiter. And this leads me to something I want to touch on a little later, but what happened to Jupiter Station? Is that no longer there? Were they unable to pick up the Borg signals, or has that been moved to Earth? I don't know, but I do want to touch on that because I think there's a missed opportunity there. So they end up taking the D off to Jupiter while the Titan is the only ship in range able to maybe counteract what's going on with the Borg threat. And we get some lovely moments between the crew of the D where they're potentially saying goodbye forever, where Riker and Picard are going to beam over to the Borg cube in order to attempt a rescue at Jack, or at the very least, kill him because he is the one responsible for this evil Borg transmission that's taking control of the entire Starfleet fleet. Do I just say the entire Starfleet? I should probably just say the entire Starfleet. Then we have a nice little moment with Worf where he breaks the tension with humor, which basically seems to be his running role throughout this series, which is hit or miss because he does get some serious things to do, but I do feel like they're leaning heavily on him and potentially Data's new form to be that comic relief to relieve that tension for us as an audience. His little joke here is, I guess we'll make it a threesome, when he decides to join Riker and Picard on this away mission. Think of that what you may, I actually enjoyed that little moment. The ship battles here are wonderful. We get to see the Titan once they've taken control using a newly invented technology, a transporter rifle, where basically they're able to shoot somebody, and I guess it puts a transporter lock on them and then simultaneously beams them into the transporter room, which they've then barricaded off. So that was a nice way of getting the younger crew off the bridge without killing them or without having to do anything unseemly to them to get them out of the picture. I really like that, and it could potentially lead to a further development of an interesting technology down the line. In all of these ship battles, like I said, they're using their beam phasers. It's nice to see these explosions, the flybys. They use the cloaking device, which is something I saw a lot of people complaining about because it seemed like they forgot it. So it's nice to see that come back into the storyline here as well. And we also get to see on the Borg cube that things aren't necessarily what they seem to be. It appears as if the Borg cube is mostly derelict. They weren't able to pick up any life signs for the most part except for Jack's, and that took a little bit of work. And that's because this Borg ship is in a state of disrepair. It's barely hanging on to life. Most of the corpses of the Borgs have been cannibalized to draw power to, I would seemingly have to say, keep the Borg Queen alive. So most of the drones are corpses, which basically means at this point these are Borg zombies, which is fantastic because the Borg have always kind of been like zombies. So to actually have Borg zombies kind of seems like a full circle moment to us here. Our main threesome on the Borg cube not facing much resistance because of the corpse Borg. They determine that Jack is one level lower, so our team has to split up. Jean-Luc goes off to try and rescue him, while Riker and Worf stay behind to try and disable the transmitter in the Borg cube to stop everything from going to hell, which kind of already is taking place if you go look at Sector 001. This is where we get a nice fight scene between Riker, Worf, and the Borg. Another moment of humor here, although Worf is injured fairly decently here. Back on the Enterprise D, where Geordi is in command, they figure out they need to fly into the heart of the Borg cube in order to destroy the transmitter and then potentially rescue our people. And it's kind of a very Star Wars-y type thing to do here. They don't think anyone could do it. However, Data has a gut feeling that he's able to follow through and complete this mission, even based on the odds kind of saying they're not able to. So it's nice to see this little humanity thing of Data rearing its head again here. Obviously, as an audience, we know this is going to succeed. This is how they tell us it's going to succeed. But it was just a nice character moment to see this new interplay between Geordi and his old friend Data. He flies through. He's able to accomplish his mission. This is where I do want to touch on a couple of things. So this episode did not feature the return of either O'Brien or Barclay. I thought that at least O'Brien would have made 100% sense because he did bookend the original series. He was in the pilot, he was in the end. He had such a relationship throughout all of DS9. So I just thought that he would be a great inclusion. And I personally was under the impression maybe his way onto the show would be he had been working in engineering on the Enterprise D. He had been hired by Geordi to be one of the people working on restoring this project, and when they stole it out of the Fleet Museum last episode, he happened to still be on board, so that would be kind of an interesting way to get him involved. However, it wouldn't necessarily have fit with the emotional impact they were trying to display here to have him on the bridge who doesn't necessarily have the same personal connections, so that may not have worked out well. I just thought that would be a fun way to do it. I did mention that Jupiter was the location of this Borg vessel hiding in Jupiter's atmosphere. Why was Jupiter Station unaware of this, and who do we know who was last stationed on Jupiter Station? That would be Reginald Barclay. So I personally think it kind of would have been an interesting scene if they were able to include him here in a brief cameo, helping them out to save the day right here. Something along the lines of this little conversation here. They're jamming our sensors. I can't get a transporter lock. They'll all be killed. Sir, we're receiving a hail from Jupiter Station. Barclay! Hello, Geordi. Listen, I've managed to reconfigure the station to direct a 60 terawatt tachyon beam towards the Borg ship. This should punch a hole through their interferometric graviton field and allow for a transporter lock, but you'll only have one shot. Good luck. Thanks, Reg. Then a small smile and a nod, and then the screen goes off, and that is our Reginald Barclay cameo for the episode, kind of allowing our characters to fly off and do what they need to do, and enable them to rescue their friends. I don't know why. I feel like this would be a very fitting inclusion for Reginald Barclay if he were to appear in this season. Not really playing into the story too much, but giving him an actual, meaningful, pivotal role. Picard finds Jack, finds the Borg Queen. There's a nice little conversation between them. Obviously, we've got that whole first contact Borg trauma thing going on with Picard. The Borg Queen here, apparently, in my estimation, is the Borg Queen from Endgame in Voyager, because she explicitly mentions that she was infected with a virus that cut her off from all of her family and all of her brethren, and that her roads were all destroyed. So I have to imagine this is a reference to the Endgame virus from future Janeway and how they destroyed that transwarp hub. That would be the virus and the roads she was talking about. So is this supposedly the actual Borg Queen from Endgame? I personally think it is, even though that's not necessarily any personal connection to Picard himself. During this situation, Picard is trying to reason with Jack, but he's unable to disconnect him physically, according to the Borg Queen, because that will kill him. So the only way for Jack to come out of this, after finding the family or whatever with the collective, is for him to willingly disconnect himself, and he's not doing that. So Picard decides to do the one thing he has never wanted to do again. He's been running from his whole life. He jacks back into the Borg collective. He plugs that thing right in his neck, and there's a nice mindscape conversation between Jean-Luc and Jack where they kind of come to terms with each other, very reminiscent of that scene when Data and Lore kind of were battling and then they became one. So it's a very nice scene. We have Picard here telling his son, you know what, if you're not going to leave with me, I'm going to stay here with you and we'll die together, because my friends, one way or another, are going to stop this destruction of the galaxy by taking out this Borg vessel. And if I have to die with you, then so be it. And that kind of gives him that last little nudge, and they both disconnect each other, and they're ready to get out of there. However, they're unable to get the transporter lock. The only way for a rescue is Riker and Troy's psychic bond, their little love connection, because he's telling her goodbye psychically, basically saying, you know what? I love you. I'll see you later. You and I will be reunited in the afterlife with our son as well. And because of this mental connection, she's able to pinpoint their location, thus giving her something to actually do in this episode. And I was a little upset that she didn't crash the Enterprise for a third time. Be that as it may, at least she had the life-saving moment here. They're able to beam all of our characters back onto the Enterprise D and then fly out of there before the explosion. Because of this disconnection and this destruction, this is more or less the end of the siege on Starfleet, because all of the characters eventually come out of their little trances. We're given a little bit of information here about why and how things are put back together. What happens is eventually Dr. Beverly Crusher is promoted to Admiral, the head of Starfleet Medical, and she's able to institute a correction into the transporter system to, in essence, remove this Borg meddling, to remove this altered DNA. You just have to go through the transporter and they can set you back correctly. And it's also, at the same time, she is able to implement a covert changeling sensor or something, but it's not widely known, because if it was, the changelings would be able to get around it somehow. So nice little wrap up there. I am disappointed we weren't given more backstory or more information on this Borg Changeling Alliance, or how they came to find each other, or where the Shrike came from. It feels like there were a few missed opportunities here, but I'll get to a few more missed opportunities later, because while I thought this was a great episode, and I thought it was a great season overall, there were some things I feel they didn't actually have time to tie up or give the proper respect or the proper due, and that's to be expected, I suppose, from a 10-episode story arc. It's also explained to us that the replaced characters were not killed, they were held somewhere in order to mine information from, and this is our second appearance by Tuvok, showing us he's not dead and giving us a nice moment with 7 of 9, because similar to some of the Star Trek movies, because of their actions, because of stealing the ship, because of all those things that happened before this invasion, she thinks that she's going to be kicked out of Starfleet, so she tries to resign, but it turns out that actually she is being promoted to captain because because of the last transmission Captain Shaw had sent before his death, before this whole thing kicked off, basically recommending her for promotion and extolling all of her virtues, basically letting us know that he did care for her even though he was coming off as gruff. Sad that he's gone. Obviously, he could come back. Even Terry Matalas has said that he could come back if they need him to in the future. There's a nice, easy way for me to bring him back using Borg nanoprobes, especially because that would add so much to his character. Somebody that spent his life hating the Borg being brought back thanks to the Borg nanoprobes. I know that's probably an easy solution, similar to what they did on Voyager, but in my mind, that would be the best way to make it work and also add some new flaws to the character, some nice new meaty story elements going forward. After all of our little crew reunions, we get to see Raffi and her character arc, we get to see Data in therapy, and then we skip 1 year later. And this is where I think we had a lot of the missed opportunities, but because of the time skip, it didn't necessarily feel unearned because we weren't staying in that time period. So we did not get a reunion with Geordi and his family, Geordi and his daughters. I feel like that was the most emotional reunion we should have seen. But because this is Star Trek Picard and not the actual Next Generation, I guess that wasn't needed because he is aware that they're still alive. I just feel like that was the one conclusion I personally wanted to see to their story arc. We also didn't see a reunion of Riker, Troy, and Kestra, their daughter, and not really even a mention of where she is. Not really necessarily this season's fault because that was a character introduced a while ago. There was also no reunion or discussion of the Picard and Laris situation, so is she still waiting for him? I don't know. Like I said, no Barclay or O'Brien, no Troy crashing the Enterprise, and we did get a reunion of Raffi and her granddaughter and her son, which leads me to something else this episode did that kind of was reminiscent of older Star Trek. They reused footage, especially that scene of the cloaking of the Titan and the image or the footage of Raffi's granddaughter. That was the same footage we've seen multiple times throughout this season and possibly past seasons. Brings me back to those old school days of trying to save money and reusing footage in Star Trek, so I actually thought it worked out pretty well in my opinion. We have the final 10 forward scene with all of the OG TNG characters drinking. They decide to play poker, and it's an incredibly long, lingering shot while they play the entire TNG theme song, kind of remixed a little bit, while they're playing poker from overhead, and it just goes on and on and on, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It was very emotionally fulfilling, I suppose, and I understand that's probably emotional manipulation, but for me, it worked 100%, and I just really liked that. I was scared someone from our original cast was going to die, and while that wouldn't make sense storyline-wise, I'm kind of glad they didn't. However, if they do start bringing our characters back in spin-off series, one after another, and it doesn't feel as sacred anymore, then I might feel a little differently about that. One thing I forgot to mention, they rechristen the Titan A as the Enterprise G. Still a little mixed on this. I do 100% understand the fact they wanted to get a new Enterprise out there. It made sense. I personally kind of thought they were going to name it the USS Picard. Maybe that doesn't make sense because technically he's still alive, but that just was the impact it made on me looking at Patrick Stewart's face when he was giving that reaction to the new ship. While Enterprise G does 100% work for me as a ship name and a new christening of an older vessel, I feel like it kind of does a little bit of a disservice to the name of the Titan, because the original Titan was a pretty badass ship. The Titan A was a pretty badass ship, so to rename it this way kind of feels like it takes a little bit away from the Titan legacy to add to the Enterprise legacy. I'm not going to hate on that too much. That's just my personal opinion on the matter. But we get to see here that Jack is an ensign assigned to the Titan, now the Enterprise, under Captain 7 of 9. And who do we see appear in his quarters? Thank you, Terry Matalas, for correcting this Season 2 mistake. Q. And we're told here that the trial ended for Jean-Luc, but it's just beginning for his son, Jack, and that's pretty much the end of the season, pretty much the end of the series, giving us these little hopeful moments that we'll see the Enterprise G adventures in a further series. No confirmation on that thus far, but we're getting all sorts of other announcements, so what are they waiting for? But that's this season, that's this series. I have rambled on so long, I'll probably have to do a video just on my opinions of the series, but as a culmination of these 10 episodes, I thought this was a very emotionally satisfying episode. Yes, there were some things they didn't explain. Yes, there were some things that I believe could have been done better, but that's always going to be the case. And I think as far as an emotional payoff, kind of trying to give the TNG crew their movie universe they never really truly had, basically kind of jumping through the best hits of the original series movies here, I feel like that was the case here. This wasn't supposed to be a TNG type episode. This was supposed to be that grand return, that grand finale, that wrap up 30 years later that we never really had in the movies. I thought that for the most part it was pretty compelling, and that even though some of the story didn't add up and there were little plot holes here and there, all of that was paved over by the emotional implications, the story elements, and the characters. Leave all your thoughts below, like, share, subscribe, do all those fancy YouTube things. Tell me all about this season, all about what you thought, and until next time,
what began over 35 years ago ends tonight.
When darkness